Economy is joining me right now via Zoom. Hello, Prof, and thank you for joining us. Good morning to you from Abuja. Hello, Prof, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yes.
Okay. Good morning to you, Prof. Let me start by asking you this. I know that in the past you had said that Nigeria is in an existential crisis. How much of a crisis are we in right now?
Well, I think probably it's not the best to create any panic that is undue, but it is important to have an alert system that says we cannot pretend that this is normal and continue business as usual. We are in fairly difficult crisis. I mean, even the statements of public officials show how deep a crisis is. When a public official says to you, yes, indeed, we cannot amortize our commitments as they come due, uh, just based on revenues we project, it tells you that you are in a really serious crisis. Um, when you get to the kind of situation you get in, you begin to put in place some very significant measures. Why many are alarmed is that they don't see any really serious effort to put the appropriate kind of measures in place. So, in the short term or short run, these are dangers. In the medium term, even more grave dangers if we don't immediately turn around the way we do things. There's no question in my mind that when you look at the um, trends, when you look at the reality that is developing, you will see an even much bigger crisis ahead. So yes, there's need to be alarmed, but I think that it is possible to solve these problems if we have some sensible decision making in place.
Okay, Prof, I would come back to the solutions to solve this crisis. But just like you can see right there on the screen, is Nigeria broke? Do you think that Nigeria is broke? Or is Nigeria technically broke? Or really there's no difference?
Uh, yeah, it's broke. Let's not fiddle around. If this was your family savings account and you were in the situation that Nigeria is now, you will be called broke. As broke as I typically am, as a teacher, we get broke, and Nigeria is broke. It shouldn't be, but it is broke. Um, what are you when you are broke? You're broke when you cannot pay your bills as they come due. Why are the airlines cutting down flights to Nigeria? They're cutting down flights to Nigeria because Nigeria is unable to remit the monies that have accumulated in Nigeria. People have paid, traveled, come back, but the airlines have the money stuck in Nigeria. Only a person who's broke fails to pay his bills when they're due. So let's not monkey around. Nigeria is broke.
Prof, how crucial is 2023 really in this conversation on the life of the political economy of Nigeria and the economy of Nigeria? How crucial is 2023? Because it was James Carville, I think in 1993 or 1992 during Bill Clinton's campaign manager, James Carville, that said the economy is stupid, the economy is stupid. Do you think that it will be the economy stupid for Nigerians in 2023? And how crucial is 2023 in the life of Nigeria's existence?
Extremely critical. It's make or break time for Nigeria. We can either decide we want to be, um, a an also ran country, or we want to rebuild. I very often, when the issue comes to this, like to give um, some examples from history. And very recently, I used the example of India. You know, the foreign reserves of India by 1991, and I was visiting Delhi at the time, was down to no more than 3 weeks trading money. Technically, India was bankrupt at that time. But India went to, almost by accident, in my view, because the Congress Indira party had lost Rajiv Gandhi to an assassination. And they were trying to find a placeholder, if you will use that Nigerian political language, somebody to fill the gap until the next Gandhi was ready to take over. And so they picked Rao to be prime minister. And Rao, as we like to joke in those days, a friend of mine was a professor at INSEAD called Jonathan Story, wrote a remarkable case study on India a year or two after that, in which he talked about India, Hindu elephant, or Asian tiger. Rao, with nothing to lose, in Jonathan Story's words, turned to Manmohan Singh, who would probably have had no chance of being made foreign minister, finance minister at the time. And Singh began to push a series of policies that the Gandhis could not push. As, again, my friend Jonathan Story used to say, Rajiv Gandhi realized the problem India was in, but found that the right decisions to make would essentially repudiate the legacy of his mother and grandfather, who were both prime ministers. And so he couldn't make the right decision with force. He just nibbled away at the edges. But when Rao, who had nothing to lose, came and brought Manmohan Singh in as finance minister, Singh began some bold reforms that invariably gave more confidence to the world about India, and a surge of investments began to come into India. By 1993, at a point in the 1993-94 season, India's foreign reserves were going up by more than $1 billion a week. The leading source of those pouring in of investments was the United States of America. The second, remarkably, in one particular chart that I saw back then, was from non-resident Indians, the Indian diaspora. Now, this surge of monies into India led to a turning around in India. And I feel that in many ways, 2023 provide us the same opportunity in Nigeria. You know, I don't know if you recall, about 2 years ago, Forbes magazine carried an article, I think it was in May 28 or so, that described Nigeria as Africa's money-losing machine. As Forbes described Nigeria as Africa's money-losing machine. In effect, they were saying to put money in Nigeria was to lose it, to throw it away. Why was Nigeria, with its great potential, Africa's money-losing machine? Because of regulatory risk, because of how those who run the Nigerian economy were running it. It was generally assumed that you were foolish as a foreign investor to bring money into Nigeria. And let me tell you how critical those comments are. We live at a time in human history where capital is abundantly available. The French economist Thomas Piketty, I mean, he's probably the leading authority on this stuff today. And he shows clearly how globalization has allowed the accumulation of more capital than at any time in human history. We know how low interest rates are around the world and what they can do in this country. But the monies are still not coming to Nigeria. Why are they not coming to Nigeria? Because the world does not have confidence in those who run the Nigerian economy. Simple. So if we can replace those who run the Nigerian economy, it would have the same effect that India had when Manmohan Singh became finance minister and began some policy reforms. We would see a surge of private capital coming to Nigeria to do infrastructure. We will see a surge of private capital coming to Nigeria and turn us away towards a more productive base. Of course, we'd have to do something about security. We would see the possibility of Nigeria not only beginning to approach self-sufficiency in food production, but actually in the export. We have seen from Ukraine's troubles how dependent we are for food imports on the world, on countries like Ukraine. We should not only be self-sufficient in food, but be exporting. But all of these things are not happening because we've not had the appropriate level of investments that should go into sectors like agriculture. We need massive new investments to reprogram agriculture and feed value chains that can lead to significant agro-based manufacturing in Nigeria for export. This is what we get in the Nigerian economy, really truly running away from the terrible trap into which it has fallen. Of course, in the short term, we have to go to austerity. We've got to cut consumption. We've got to make government realize that it's not business as usual and cut its, its spending dramatically and put money in more critical areas like education. We can't be talking about a knowledge age and our universities are shut down for 5 months and going. Whereas the money that is being wasted in many parts of this politics or government of politicians for politicians by politicians can go into serving the Nigerian people, open that sector, open the critical sectors of the economy, turn to a latent comparative advantage in driving these global value chains out of our factor endowments, and the Nigerian economy will be thriving and running. But I'm afraid it needs new managers. It needs a clearance of the kind of political actors that are on the stage now, because they don't seem to have any clue what they are doing, and they are disconnected from the Nigerian people. And that's the worst part. When you can't feel the pain of the people, you shouldn't be in government. Nigerian people are crying, their pain is loud, and we need people who understand, who can feel that pain, and who can creatively, manage the economy in a way that the opportunities that are abound out there can come in and drive a new direction for growth, development, provision of jobs for young people. I just take, today is the 1st of August. This is Africa Climate Month. Just taking a green view of a world imperiled that needs to fight climate change can immediately provide hundreds of thousands of quality jobs for Nigerian youth. But those who manage Nigerian economy don't have that level of understanding or creativity to do that. And that is a shame. That is really, truly a shame. Because there are policy choices we can make now that can put millions of young Nigerians back to work. But those who run Nigeria today are disconnected from the youth of this country. They see them as lazy, whereas that is untrue. It is those who run the Nigerian economy who are lazy and not creative, and our country is paying a very dear price for it.
Prof, I would like to get your view on this. If Nigeria has a revenue problem or a spending problem or a cost problem, because I've been at, I've moderated conferences where I've had the Minister of Finance speak to the audience, and even me, when I ask her what crisis we are in, and she'll be like, Nancy, we have a revenue problem. I've spoken to some people, they say, oh, we have a spending problem. Some people say, no, it's a matter of cost. I'd like to get your view on that.
We have all these problems. Let me come from a revenue point of view. We have a revenue a problem in the sense of how the revenue comes and the mentality towards revenue. We have a revenue-focused economic mindset from the fact that oil revenues flowed in a manner that we began to neglect production, which could then lead to the kind of revenues that we really can build on. But I'll come to that. Before oil revenues came to make revenue and, well, quote unquote, easy thing, Nigerians paid taxes. As a young person, one of my great recollections of the 1960s was tax collection officers chasing after people who have not paid their taxes. In Lagos, you know, the Federal Capital Territory around Mushin area was the boundary from Western region, and people who were being chased by revenue officers in Western region will run across into Lagos to run free of those. So revenues, taxes were being paid. When oil began to provide revenues, we stopped paying attention to taxes. Don't trouble us. Literally speaking, government said, we don't need your revenues. They didn't say so, but that's what the effect. And they just use oil revenues. People didn't bother government. So, and you know what they say, death and taxes are the most critical, important things in life. And when you don't pay taxes, or when you pay taxes, you demand to see how the tax money is used. The Boston Tea Party in the American experience was based on that. You know, no representation, no taxation without representation. That concept comes from the fact that if I pay taxes, I want my representative to find out how you are using the taxes. So Nigerians didn't bother people with taxes. People didn't bother them with how they were spending the money. But the mindset of what government is about became sharing revenues. Fiscal transfers between tiers of government then came to dominate how we understood life. And this is why we can't even understand this question of restructuring. People think of it only in terms of revenues. You will get more share than my share. But an example I give all the time, and people need to pay attention to this, is that because we are focused so much on sharing revenues, some parts of the country think that restructuring is to take away revenues that they are getting. They are, however, oblivious of the fact that the revenues they have been getting have made them poorer. Simple logic. In the 60s, the third tier of government, local governments, were not part of the fiscal transfer system. It was only the national government and the subnational, the regions. So local governments were created at the convenience of the regions. It just turned out by that convenience that there were many more local governments in the south than in northern Nigeria. When by 1975-76, we moved to a system in which the three tiers of government were involved in fiscal transfers. So these revenues collected were now shared to local governments, and local governments got as much as 20.9%, 21% more or less of federally collected revenues. A lot more revenues began to flow to places that had local governments. And of course, if you had power, you created more local governments. It went to the point that of the 774 local governments that we ended up with, nearly 500 were in the old north, which used to be half of the number of local governments in the south. But what has happened, in spite of that much more new money going into the part of Nigeria, where I grew up in the north in the 60s, that part of the country has become much, much poorer. And this is as a result of what I like to refer back to as the lottery effect. If you see a poor man who has won the lottery, 5 years later, they are poorer than they were before they won the lottery.
Yeah.
And you know, economists will, you know, talk about the dimensions that lead to this in human behavior. But the point I'm trying to make is that we've become obsessed with revenues, in a manner of speaking, in Nigeria. If we produced and taxed out of the production, the kinds of issues of revenues that we have will be completely different. Is there a problem with spending? Yes, there is a problem with spending. There's a recklessness in how Nigerian government spends money. And the little example I've been using lately is comparing Egypt and Nigeria. I mean, I was at the Afrexim Bank annual general meeting a few weeks ago. A couple of Nigerian bankers came down from the same hotel that I was staying in. They had ordered a limo, a car, and some Hyundai or something pulls up, and they were so upset. Is this a limousine? Well, in Cairo, this is a limousine, my friend. Just get into it and go where you're going. You go to Abuja, you can't find. There are many more SUVs in Abuja than there are in Tokyo, possibly. I don't know. Why are we spending the kind of money we're spending the way we're spending it? It's almost irresponsible. See, if you have your money, you can buy as many SUVs as you want. You work for the government. You use something more modest because it is a scarce public resource to be used for the good of the people. But when everybody who holds any funny position in government has to have an SUV, the revenues, the spending of the country is so unproductively channeled that it's not an accident that we are poor. So there is a revenue problem, there's a spending problem, and so on your chain. Okay. So to try and say Nigeria's problem is not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. Hogwash is both. Anyway.
Okay, Prof. Prof, and we have about 5 minutes to the end, and I wish we had more time to dig into some of these conversations, but I know that I'll have to bring you back some other time. But as we close, I would like to really have your view. You know, you've talked about how we got here, and while you were also speaking, I caught the solutions to where we are right now. But there's the issue of Nigeria's debt, which is the debt servicing right now. How would we pay the debts? How can this generation pay for what they did not utilize? Because for me, as someone that covers business finance every day, I've been doing it now for years, I find it difficult to sleep. When I reflect on Nigeria's problems, I don't sleep, let alone I wonder how those that manage it would be doing. So how can this generation pay for what they did not utilize? How do we get out of this?
It's morally wrong, but it's an obligation. But it has to have a very clever way of doing it. Let me tell you something. I mean, in last few days, I've spoken very, generously about the fact that General Obasanjo made a better choice when he focused on savings and the excess crude account. But I also think that they made an error of judgment in the way they paid off the old debts. You see, we had reached an agreement with the international community. Naples terms would have allowed us to spread all that money over a long period of time. And if we had a very productive economy, the real effect of it would be negligible. It would be almost like we got IDA money, International Development Association money, and we would have paid it all off. But somehow in the braggadocio of the moment when oil revenues went dramatically up, we chose to take all that money that we could have invested more appropriately to pay off old debts. In a manner of speaking, if we begin to show seriousness about growing the economy, the international community will respect the fact that the whole world will profit more from a prospering Nigeria, and we'll be able to negotiate Naples kinds of terms again for our debts, even though they've been irresponsibly accumulated. And if we get those kinds of terms and we're really producing, the effect on a generation that did not partake in this abuse will be minimized. But it's still a national obligation. If we are not careful, the Chinese will come and take over the place like they've tried to do in some places, literally because of the nature of the agreements that we've gone into. Compare what it's costing us to build the Lagos-Ibadan rail line, Lagos-Kaduna, 10 times what Ethiopians have spent. from the same Chinese, and so on and so forth. We've got to eventually begin to bring to book all of the people who have made our country, this mess that it is.
Okay.
Eventually, we must, as a country, we can't free ourselves of the moral burden until at least history says these guys are the people who ruin the future of their children. Even if that's all that we do, it's worth it.
Prof, in just a minute, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund came to my mind, which is the world's biggest SWF, with about $1.3 trillion. In fact, I think in the first quarter of this year, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund lost $74 billion out of that $1.3 trillion because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China lockdowns. Where am I going to? Nigeria's ECA has been depleted to $376,000 from about $35 million. The Minister of Finance said that there's been no accrual in the last 4 years because of oil prices, and I find it so hard to believe, because if I take a look, my research shows me that at least we've earned so much from oil. Take a look at what is happening right now. So I know there's a sovereign wealth fund that's managed, the NSIA, but what lessons, is there really any lesson to learn from Norway, or we need to get ourselves out of the pit first?
Plenty of lessons to learn from Norway. I don't think I'll have enough time, but it's something I've talked about for a long time. About 20 years ago, I was making a presentation at the Lagos Business School economic briefing breakfast, which I used to host from 1998. And the resident IMF chief in Abuja at the time was present at that event. And I was talking about Botswana and Botswana's future fund. And I made a passing jest about, look at Botswana, that we helped to set up their judiciary, their central bank, and all of that, how more intelligently than us they manage their economy. And I gave the example of the future fund in Botswana. And I said, look, I've been arguing for years that Nigeria's revenues should be broken into the distributable pool fund, a stabilization fund, and a future fund. And that the distributable pool fund should take a minimal approach. So if oil prices were, say, at $100, no more than 30 or so dollars should go into that pool that the state shares with the federal government and the local governments. A fund, a stabilization fund, say from 30 to maybe 50, will be there invested, but in near money kind of investment, so that if oil prices were to drop to $10, for example, you will make sure that the budgets don't crash, that it will still continue to be at that $30 this thing, drawing from the stabilization fund. And that everything above 50 should go to the future fund, which is what Botswana did brilliantly. Between 1968 and 1980, Botswana was the fastest growing economy in the world out of diamond exports. But they recognized that diamonds belong to every generation of Botswanans, and they put plenty of that money in the future fund. Today, Botswana can run its budget significantly on its future fund. So we don't need to go to Norway to draw a lesson. Economy will help to develop, like Botswana, to teach us what we're supposed to help them set up. All that has happened is that we have had a political class that has been insensitive to the needs of the future of Nigeria. That's all that has happened to Nigeria. And there's been a true squandering of riches.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your insights this morning. Like I said earlier, I would still need to speak to you on some other issues, but we'll reschedule a later date. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining me this morning. All right, I've been speaking with Professor Pat. I've been speaking with Professor Pat Utomi, who is a professor of political economy. We've been looking at the current states of Nigeria's economy. So it's a wrap today. Please join me again tomorrow on this channel. Another guest, another topic. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be that change that you want to see. Bye now.